back to the podcast. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. Now, this is going to air after Christmas, so I hope that you guys have all had a fabulous Christmas. And you know, statistics show the most that people are put into nursing homes is at Thanksgiving, I believe, or right after Thanksgiving, because, you know, we're all together with mom and dad, and we're thinking, you should probably not be living on your own. So that kind of ties in today to what we are going to talk about with Ellison Braun, who is an advanced funeral planner with a funeral home here in Bismarck. Does not essentially matter where she's at, but she has been so kind as to just share her time with us and share with you guys what you need to know about funeral planning. Because yes, I could talk more about IBC, but we're all going to graduate, as Nelson said, and we do not get out alive. And when we graduate, we should have those things planned for. It is extremely hard on families, on kids. And so I wanted to bring Ellison on so we could talk about what are those decisions? What can you guys do to get a step up to relieve your family of some of that pressure? So thank you, Ellison, very much for being here. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, and so Ellison is working from home today. For those of you watching on video, because we are under snowstorm at this recording. She's not going anywhere. No. So I got dressed for the occasion today. Yeah. All right, Ellison. So let's start with the basics. What I have read, there is a great book called By the Stroke of a Pen. And it was a lady, I think that was a financial planner, and her husband died. And she talks about all of the decisions that had to be made. And she said, we planned and we still were not planned. And to plan an actual funeral from beginning to end, have you ever counted how many actual decisions have to be made?
Yeah, so there's about 75 to 130 details in a 36-hour timeline that families would need to make decisions on. And personally, before I even took this position, I was on that side. I was that family. I had a step parent who passed away unexpectedly quite young at 56, and nothing was talked about. And so when families come in to make funeral arrangements, when something is not planned and not, expected, they're really taken by surprise on the information that they need to know. And honestly, an hour into that arrangements, that family sitting at that arrangement table with that director, an hour into it, you can just see the looks on their faces. They're already starting to get that kind of glossy-eyed look where it's overwhelming. It's a lot. And honestly, the worst time to make all of those decisions is at that time, because you are dealing with a loss. And if anybody knows, your memory, you just don't function correctly. Your brain doesn't think, you forget dates and details. And so now you're dealing with one of the worst times of a lot of people's lives, is dealing with the loss of a loved one. Now you have to make all of those decisions. So let's just say 130 decisions in that time frame.
36 hours, meaning from the time somebody passes to the time the funeral happens, we have 36 hours. Is that what you're saying for 36?
Right. So when someone passes away, the timeline typically, when we receive a death notice, the family will usually come in within that next day, depending on the time of death. At that point is where all of those decisions are starting to happen. And so, for instance, in North Dakota, if you're looking at cremation, we need to cremate within 48 hours. We actually need to embalm you or cremate you within 48 hours of passing. And so when the disposition has not been decided yet, if their parent has never disclosed if they want full body burial or cremation, that family is going to need to make that decision in a very quick timeline. And it's difficult, especially cremation. That's a whole nother beast. I mean, it's a whole nother set of documents and papers that have to be signed and authorized by the appropriate people, not just people.
So I have so many questions. And for those of you listening, like I am as naive coming into this as you are listening. So if you think I'm asking stupid questions, they're probably the same questions you're gonna have. So Allison is gonna be very patient today.
Mhm.
So what that leads me though, I have been to funerals where we've passed away, 2 days later, we have the funeral, and then or we have the viewing, and then we have a funeral, but they've been cremated between the viewing and the funeral. But that's more than 48 hours.
So, but one thing has to be done in that 48 hours. So you need to be embalmed or cremated. So if that person was viewable, they were embalmed. They technically you have to be. So, you have to be embalmed or cremated.
So can you be cremated after you're embalmed because I've changed my mind, or that's what we wanted, a viewing and the?
Correct.
So the cost is twice as much because
it can be. So traditional funerals are going to be the most expensive because and you're going to need, because you have to have a casket and you have to have a vault. Now every state has their different rules and regulations. So I'm going off of North Dakota.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when you look at a traditional funeral, the embalming is a little more than a cremation. The merchandise is where you're going to see that be affected the most. So today, a traditional funeral, you're looking at about 14,000 and up. I mean, really, when you look at cremation, there's different levels of cremation. And every single time I meet with people, and this is why when anybody pre-plans, if you're looking at pre-planning, take the time to work with a funeral planner, because they're going to ask you the questions that you won't think of to better put you in a direction of what you're really looking at doing for a funeral. So when I get people that come in, and I say, have you decided on your disposition? Are you looking at full body? Are you looking at cremation? They're going to say one or the other, right? But then they're not aware of that 48-hour time frame. So I will always ask, tell me a little bit about yourselves. Tell me about your family. If they say, my family is scattered, I have kids who live in Florida and Texas, right away, that is going to tell me that there might be an issue with that 48-hour timeline with cremation. Can they get here within 48 hours? Because really, when we plan our funerals, yes, we're choosing the disposition that we believe in, that we want personally, but we plan our funerals for those that we're leaving behind. If they need to see you, we can't really deny them that. So if you need to be,
what do you have say? I'm the one dying. I'm pre-planning. I'm paying for this thing. I am going to be cremated. Okay. That makes sense.
Correct.
Because the kids have to get home because they want a last viewing. Okay.
For sure. So then that leads me into what we call is traditional followed by cremation. Honestly, that is the most common cremation package or service that I feel people in this community purchase. And it's because we are a traditional community. We really like the viewing. We want that visitation, but we still believe in allowing our families that visitation. And so with that traditional, that person then would be embalmed. That saves time now for that family to get here. Okay. They will then be utilizing a rental casket for a visitation and or funeral. You can be full body for both, and then brought back in for cremation. Then your burial will typically be a day or two later. Some people they do the embalming just long enough for them to get here so that they can have maybe their own private family viewing. Then we will cremate. So then it would be a cremation for the funeral itself. So there's different levels. So it's really, really, really important, when especially like if someone sends me a message or leaves me a voicemail and says, hey, can you send me out some pre-planning information? I do everything in my power to get them just to set up a time to visit instead. It is so black and white. If you just look at it, it's overwhelming. And you need someone to really put you in the right direction and ask the right questions. Because if I don't ask that, they don't think of that.
So here's the thing and here's one of the bigger things that I kind of want to touch on is I did not know this. And so I was visiting with one of the gentlemen from the life insurance company that I use. And he said when his mother passed away, it was very sudden, but they had life insurance on her, obviously. And so they went to the funeral home. He went with his dad to plan, and it was just one question after another. What casket, what lining, what this, what, and by the time he said they were about a half an hour in, and
Sure.
he could just see his dad shut down. And
Yep.
he just said, just pick something. Who effing cares what it is? We have death benefit. We can pay for it, Dad. Just pick it. Quit worrying about the cost, because every time the funeral planner, director, whoever it is that does that job, asked him that, there was a cost associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not been in that situation. But hearing that story just broke my heart, because everything comes down to the cost and you're planning somebody's funeral. So what are some of those big things? Like if we don't plan, so obviously people, if you're listening, we're saying, Allison and I are saying, plan your funeral. But if you don't plan, Allison, what are the things they're going to stick their family with as far as decisions that have to be made about
a lot
those sort of things?
Yes. So there's 3 different parts actually to a funeral contract. So even if it's pre-need or at need, and the three sections are going to be service related. So there's going to be a dollar cost affiliated for visitation, no visitation, funeral, burial, merchandise. You're looking at casket, vault, programs, the book people sign when they attend the service, thank you cards. Do you want a video for your visitation?
The lining. Like the lining actually has to be picked out. Is that a real
thing? No, ours is with it. No, our merchandise comes with it's the lining is part of the casket.
So when I go to pick out a casket, so first of all, I got to decide if I want visitation or not. I might be naive here, but that seems kind of simple. That's either kind of a yes or no. But now we have to pick out a casket, and we have to go back and we have to look at all the caskets, and we're shopping. We're literally shopping.
Yes. So you're going to be looking at being put in front of you depending on where someone's located. So like if you're looking at our funeral home, we're going to have a variety of steel and wood. Now you have to people look at the steel and say, why is there a price difference? Well, what kind of liner does it have? Is it velvet? Is it crepe? Is it a 20 gauge steel, 18 gauge steel? Does it have the memorial items with it where people can kind of customize the end caps of that casket? So there's so many different levels from, $2,300 up to, people can even order copper. So the thing is, Mary Jo, so when you look at a funeral cost, when you look at the difference of when someone pre-plans to at need, there's a huge cost difference. Why? Because if someone pre-plans, they tend to be a little more conservative. Some go all out, don't get me wrong. Some will be the Liberace of funerals, no doubt. But some are very conservative. When it's at need, when someone has passed and they haven't selected anything, they tend to overspend because the family is purchasing out of grief, emotions.
And they can't make the decision. They don't have time to make the decision. They don't have the heart to, they don't have the mental capacity. The mourning piece of it is massive. And I talk about that a lot on this podcast, is that my widows, and for right now, I have quite a few widows in the last 2 years. And those widows, it's going to take them a year to even get to where they can really think. I have a widower right now. When he called me to tell me that his fiance had passed, I talked to him, I don't know, a month and a half later probably. And he asked me all the same questions he asked me the 2 days after she passed, because he didn't remember anything we had talked about. And so when you said you're not going to remember, like, that is eye-opening.
Yeah. Right.
That's eye-opening.
So some of the other details that someone's going to have to remember or select. The third part of a funeral contract is all of those miscellaneous items: death certificates, obituary, clergy, Do you have someone singing, playing the piano, a filing fee for the county, internment, digging of the plot, honor guard? If you're at the Veterans Cemetery, there's headstones, monuments, markers, luncheon, church women, the serving group. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So when I do pre-planning, we tackle all three of them.
You just said one of them, and I was gonna want
That's veterans.
No, it was one of the
interment.
No, dang it, what was it? It might come to me as we were visiting.
Maybe
but
it was death certificate.
Oh, the death certificate.
Yeah.
I have had clients, I just assumed that you go to the nursing or you go to the funeral home and you get a death certificate and you can get as many as you want. I did not realize you have to pay for every single one of those.
Yeah, because they actually come from the state. And so when we talk to people about death certificates, it's changed a little bit, I feel like, around here, because a lot of places, from speaking with families, a lot of people will, you have to have the certified original when you come into a business. A lot of them are actually, though, making a copy of that certified original and giving back that original to the family. So it used to be where we would see 20 plus death certificates. Now it's probably more 10 to 20 because businesses never used to make a copy. Like someone might go into their insurance office and with that original death certificate, they may make just a copy of it and then just give it right back to the family, which it never used to really be that way. But death certificates, yeah, I mean, right now in North Dakota for us, 10 death certificates is $105. So, I mean, everything adds up quickly. And we get everything for the family. Every single thing that is on that miscellaneous side, we will do for the family. So we obtain those death certificates and we bring them to the funeral home and then give them to who they have selected as basically like the informant. They have to sign that they received those. So yeah, there's lots of different.
So do you go over that in the pre-planning too, what
Yes.
you will need a death certificate for?
Correct. You know what? And honestly, I'm going to give you you're going to need it for a cell phone for sure. People always forget about the cell phone, anything financial, insurance, medical. But crazy enough, I had a woman that I met with and her sister had passed away. And her sister was on the mailing list for Prairie Nights Casino. And she kept getting it after she passed. And so the sister called out there and said, look, my sister has passed away. We need to remove her from that mailing list. They wouldn't without a death certificate. So honestly, and I do have a checklist of items that people need to start looking at doing ahead of time. But yeah, I do go over that because a lot of people say, well, don't we just need one or two? Oh no.
Oh,
utilities, especially when it's that second spouse. So or let's just say, and this is really common with a certain age group, all of the utilities were under the husband. Then that husband passed. The surviving spouse is now living there, but nothing was under her name. Mm-hmm. Then a death certificate, you're going to need it for that. I mean, you remove that, right?
And how about like vehicles? We have our personal vehicles. We have them all Scott and Mary Jo, not just
right.
Scott. It's not Scott or
right.
Or it's not
right.
Scott and it's Scott or, so that if
right.
he passes, I don't have to have his signature and stuff. So
exactly.
if you have them in just one name or you have the and in there, you're going to need a death certificate to get that other spouse's name off, correct?
For sure you will. And it's a lot of work. I mean, people have to realize when someone passes away, everything freezes up. I mean, your financials are going to freeze up too. So, yeah. If that surviving family is expecting to take some of that money out of their parents' account to pay maybe some utility bills that were outstanding, that's gonna freeze up. I always tell them that too. Check with your bank. See if they have a form that you can sign that allows someone to authorize your account upon passing, because it's going to freeze up and it's going to go through then into an estate or probate or something. But I do go over a checklist at those appointments saying, here's the things, and it's full. It's a long list of things to start looking at doing ahead of time.
And how about, so we'll
save the family a ton.
Right. And so we've got the funeral picked out. We've talked about, okay, if we're going to be cremated or not, if we're going to have visitation. Then we've got the casket, the all the other stuff, but we also have pallbearers, and we have, are we going to do
Yep.
it in church? We have
Right.
had, unfortunately, we have had so much loss. And we're not that old. I'm only 48,
I
people.
know.
And it is,
Yeah.
I just went onto Facebook this morning and found out that a college friend passed away. He's younger than I am, diagnosed in
Yeah.
June. And so um when we are planning, though, I've noticed that a lot of our recent funerals have not included a church, and
Right.
that they are at the funeral home. So
Right.
is some of that happening? Do you know, is it money savings? Is it that we don't necessarily belong to churches anymore? That
So,
that we can eliminate the meal and all the other stuff because it's so expensive.
well, so we see funerals at the funeral home now, more now than ever before. So if we backtrack a little bit, funeral homes in this area were unable to provide food. So when someone wanted to have a funeral with a fellowship after, where there was like a luncheon, they always had to choose the church because funeral homes weren't allowed to carry food items. Since that has changed, that is one reason we're seeing more and more people hold services at a funeral home. But part of that has to do with one, some of these churches are huge. And when someone passes and they're in their 90s, they may have a very small circle at that point where the family is like, really, do we really need to utilize a huge church for a funeral? Can we just have it at the funeral home? You can mimic that church funeral to a degree at the funeral home.
Mhm.
Obviously, you can't do like a full mass or anything like that,
Right.
but and then sometimes if you're looking at younger people, maybe they aren't affiliated with the church. Maybe they haven't set those roots at a church, but maybe they have a religious preference.
Mhm.
You know, Catholic is going to be a little different when it comes to some of those guidelines. You know, a Catholic church, in order for them to provide the funeral for a family, you do need to be a member or somehow affiliated with that church. So, you know, in fact, we are building a different, one of our funeral homes is actually building a new funeral home because of the amount of funerals being held at funeral homes. We can no longer accommodate with the size we have. So in about a year and a half, we're going to have a whole new facility because we need to accommodate funerals and luncheons
Mhm.
at our
Our
funeral
good
home.
friend that just passed away, I texted you
Yes.
while we were there and said,
Yep.
there was not enough room for everybody because he was only
Right.
48 years old.
Yeah.
There was not enough room for everybody, but
Yep.
they still had the pastor there. We still had a very nice service.
For sure.
But it was really hard to, people were in the hallways, they were trying
Oh
to
yeah.
set up TVs, people stood. I mean, and
Yeah.
it was a long service because they had a coworker who had a great story about him and just carried on and on and on. And it was awesome, but the people standing probably didn't think that was so awesome
Yeah.
because we're 2 hours in, or, you know, you get there a half an hour before. And so it was my first funeral of never actually being in a church, but
Okay.
it was still very, I felt that it was nice because we got to go, we got to view him, and then we had the funeral essentially, but we didn't
Yeah.
have to go again the next day to a church. So we
Sure.
didn't have, because a lot of people, like even my mom and dad, you know, you used to go to the viewing and you would go to prayers and then you go to the church funeral the next day. And
Next day.
so
Mhm.
it's just less time. And so now people are, even my mom and dad, they're like, okay, we're either going to prayers or we're going to the funeral. But
Very
unless it's
common.
very close family, we're not going to go to both. So
Right.
I would think because the funeral home is not having to move that person, that it's not as expensive.
You know, and it depends on the funeral home and it depends on how funeral homes have that listed. So like if you look at our funeral home, there isn't going to be that cost difference, whether we have it at a church, because we provide all the staff anyway. Some funeral homes have very small staffing, where then they are relying on the church to have their people
Oh,
work it.
Okay.
We do all of it. So we bring all of our own staff. And so if someone chooses to have a funeral at a church or at a funeral home, there is not a cost difference. The cost difference is going to be if that visitation is the night prior, because now we're utilizing a facility and staffing on a different day.
Okay.
So yeah, so if someone chooses to do, you can still have a visitation and it can just be like an hour prior to the service.
Mhm.
It just depends. You know what I mean? Like when we go over that with pre-planning, it depends on where families are all located. Some of them really want that visitation to be the night before because we have no clue when we're going to pass.
Right.
If someone is having a funeral on a weekend, some people are gone, so they want to do that visitation maybe Friday night to
Mhm.
allow people who are here to attend that.
Mhm.
And you're right, a lot of people will go to one or the other. I'm a firm believer in visitation. I feel like because of what I've gone through personally with my family, to me, the visitation makes the funeral so much more at ease for the family. Like when my stepdad passed, it was full body traditional funeral. I was very anxious because he was young, 56. I'm 50. That's scary to me right now the older I get. But going to the funeral home for the visitation, it's much more of a casual setting. There's a lot of storytelling, sharing memories. I felt so much better have gone to that than when I went to the funeral the next day, I wasn't as anxious, to
Mhm.
see him because it's like, yeah, I got my foot wet. It's like my
Yeah.
emotions got a little acclimated to what is really going to go on here.
Mhm.
And so I absolutely love visitation. I like the video, the memory, the tribute videos. I think they're just such a great way to have a remembrance of someone. Especially when you look at people who are elderly, right? If you look at the average age of someone passing, if you even look older than that, you look at someone who's in their 90s. To watch a video of their life, I think I mean, that to me is very heartwarming. I
Mhm.
love that. I think it's the best thing. That person wasn't always 95, right? That
Yeah.
person was a young person.
Yeah.
And let's remember them at all levels, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So yeah, when you talked about pallbearers, so and with pre-planning, I do at the end we go over a packet that includes how to write out an obituary. That to
Oh
me
my
was
gosh.
the worst part of my stepdad's passing was to write an obituary. When you write an obituary at death, at someone's passing, how in the world can you come up with everything right then and there? Timeline, a person. I was so nervous. I helped out quite a bit with that obituary. But here's what I tell people. You don't need to formally write out your own obituary. Do it even in bullet points. Here's when I went here and graduated here and
Uh,
and list people that should be listed. That is going to be a huge, huge piece of documentation for your family. That is one of the hardest things to do is write the obituary and then picking the songs and the readings. You can do all of that ahead of time. But a
mhm.
lot of people say to me, pallbearers, so they can select pallbearers. A lot of people get really caught up in, oh my gosh, but what if down the road that changes? The very best thing you can do is pre-plan that if something happened to you tomorrow, this is what you would want today. Everything else can be changed down the road. So I have pre-planned policies in my office from the 90s, early 2000s. Do you think some of that information has changed, preceded, survived by another great grandchild, etc.? I always recommend no matter where someone pre-plans, go back to that funeral home, maybe 5, 10 years and update it,
Mhm.
update some of that information. We go over vital statistics. Most people are not aware of your death certificate has your parents' names on there. Do your kids remember what your mom's maiden name was?
I didn't know that.
Yes. So when I asked that question during our pre-planning meeting, they always ask, how can you need my parents' names and my mom's maiden name? Because just like your birth certificate, it is on your death certificate.
And if
So
I'm
it's just
90, I mean, I might have kids that have all passed, and I don't
correct.
know that.
Correct. So here, the timeline is someone reaches out to me and says, hey, I want to pre-plan, and I invite them to come in and we visit. We go over something called a final wishes organizer. Okay. That final wishes organizer is going to have some really key information, vital statistics, just what I talked about. This is linking it to who you were. What's your maiden name, your parents' name, date of birth, your social security number, emergency contacts. That's a big one too, because I meet with a lot of people that have no children. Who will be the person that comes in here that day to finalize these arrangements if they did not, even if they didn't pre-plan? Who are we? You know, there's got to be someone. That can change again over time, but we need someone listed on there. Military. Are you a veteran? Will you be at the veteran cemetery? Have you pre-registered out there? Do you have your DD 214? Well, if you're not, will the family even have a clue of where to get it? Service information at this point. Where do you want your funeral? Where do you want your service at? The visitation? Where's burial going to take place? All of those things are on that memorial guide that I complete with them at the time of an appointment.
How often are you in hospitals because someone's on their deathbed last few hours?
So I don't go, I have not gone into hospitals much. So typically the timeline that when that happens, it's usually a family member that reaches out. When it's something that's that imminent, I actually would give them directly to a funeral director.
Oh, okay.
Because with me, it's a little bit different, but when they're
Okay.
imminent like that, a funeral director then will be the one to assist. And then we'll actually start a file just so we know that this will be coming. Hospice
Okay.
is a little bit different. I mean, honestly, people can be on hospice for quite a while.
3 months, 6 months?
If not more. I mean, if not more. And so if someone's on hospice, because I met with a family not this past summer, but the summer before, and they were super my mom's going on, hospice. We need to get this done. She was a little bit bedridden at home. So I went to their home and did this. They picked everything out. I just brought my computer with and they did everything. She's still alive. And it's been a year and a half, but because hospice then wore out, they ended up getting moved into a nursing home. Okay. So still, how great though that they did do that, because now they're still around.
Right.
So, honestly, Mary Jo, when we talk about funeral planning, there's reasons why. I always go through with people, what are the most common reasons why people pre-plan? Number one is the costs are addressed. So when you talked about the money, when you said about your friend whose dad, had life insurance and all of those items and dollars associated, one of the worst things as a director, when someone passes away and there's no pre-planning done, the director is dealing with, this family who's going through probably one of the worst days of their life and going over all these details. Now they have to ask them for money. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you pre-plan, those costs are addressed ahead of time. You know what, too, you're gonna, there's no question on disposition. And I like to touch base on this because most people are not aware of a couple of things. If someone has not pre-planned and they have not selected full body or cremation, it is really difficult for the family at time of death, at need, with no pre-planning, to make that decision. Mm-hmm. I meet with a lot of kids who have a parent maybe suffering from dementia. Maybe they are guardian of that parent. And they will sit with me and say, can you give me an idea on cost for a traditional funeral? And you know what, let's look at cremation too. Because there is a cost difference. Their smart side of their brain says, gosh, cremation sounds like the way to go because of the cost savings, right? But in the end, they more than likely will choose traditional. And why? Because they cannot do it. If their parent has not said they want cremation, they cannot do it. There's a guilty feeling for doing cremation. So I go over that with a lot of people at my seminars that I do, because with cremation, there's a separate set of documents that have to be signed, first of all. So if someone has a spouse, that surviving spouse is authorized to sign that form saying, yes, I authorize you to sign cremate my spouse. But when there is no surviving spouse, all next of kin have to authorize that. So when you look at families that maybe have 6, 7, 8 children, and let's say they haven't spoken in 20 years, in North Dakota, it doesn't matter. They're still legal next of kin. And so knowing that you can have that, if you want cremation for yourself, yet you don't want there to be any fighting with your family or any question on some of them saying, I'm not signing it, or even us locating some of those next of kin. That is a huge piece of the pie that you can have done ahead of time. You sign that cremation authorization for yourself ahead of time, and it stays in your file.
What happens if someone has power of attorney, though? Does that trump
power of attorney? No, and so power of attorney, because they can sign it ahead of time, but obviously, as you know, power of attorney at death is null. So then that person who was power of attorney while that individual was alive, at death, that person is no longer power of attorney. What will stand up in North Dakota is if they have a health directive, if they have a will, those will hold up. Those will be
or trust with somebody in charge of the health.
Correct.
So we have a trust, and then
correct.
It's broke out into pieces, and so whoever's in charge of my health, like if I'm in the hospital, whoever's in charge of my health, then is also the one that can, in North Dakota, the one that can make that decision if I am cremated or not. And then we don't have to have all the next of kin.
Yes. And so, and even more so, let's say someone has put in their will that they want to be cremated. You can put what you want down, right? This is what my health directive is. That will hold up as well. Even if someone just says, I wish to be cremated, that will hold up. But you know what? A lot of people that I either meet with as pre-planning or just even at need don't have either of those. If someone is just relying, like a lot of people say, well, I'm power of attorney, can I not do it at that time? Once your mom passes, you're no longer power of attorney. That's null. That's void. That's done.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about, we could go on forever. Let's talk about right before we got on, we were talking a little bit about Medicaid and spend down and those sort of things. And you said that some of that has changed. So can you share some of that with us?
Sure. Yep. And so for North Dakota, and everyone just needs to check with their state. So if they're in a different state, that's something just to check on. Is in 2019, funeral policies have been changed over to what's called irrevocable. So what that irrevocable means, it's in short terms protected. Okay. So it's almost like a trust where if someone goes into a nursing home and or on Medicaid, that funeral policy stays protected. So, in North Dakota, it's really common for people who go into a nursing home to end up on Medicaid. Funeral or nursing homes are not cheap.
Right.
So let's say someone is in a nursing home and they're self-paying, their funds start to diminish, then they need to qualify for Medicaid. In order to get approved by Medicaid, you have to spend your money down to $3,000. And of course, I'm talking about not married couple, just an individual here. And so if you need to spend down some funds to get to that $3,000, there's only certain things that Medicaid will allow. You can't gift it to your family. There's a 5-year look back period. They will recommend to every single person, you go get your funeral taken care of. Go pay for your funeral because it is irrevocable. It is protected. They used to cap funerals. They don't do that any longer. So you can fund your funeral as you normally would. And when we talked about that, Mary Jo, in the beginning, we talked about life insurance. There's a lot of people I meet with that don't have life insurance. And, if they don't, and if they can't qualify for it, put your money into that funeral policy, because if you end up, as we age, our medical needs can change. If you end up in a nursing home, your assets are going to go away quite quickly. Take out a funeral policy. The costs are going to get addressed. I'm actually at a funeral home where we offer a guarantee. Now your costs of your funeral is going to get locked in. How great is that? So now your costs have been addressed and it's irrevocable. So it will 100% be available to pay for the funeral at time of death.
Mhm.
It's not a matter of if that policy will get used, it's just when that
Right.
policy will get used.
Yeah.
So the Medicaid change with North Dakota has kept me extremely, extremely busy. Just because if you need to spend down your money, like I said, there's only a handful of things that Medicaid will allow you to spend your money on.
Mhm.
And let's take an example of those stimulus checks. If you were on Medicaid and received all of those stimulus checks in 2020, that puts you over that $3,000 limit if you received all of them. So it was so common for people at that time to bring in those stimulus checks and add them into their funeral policies because they can. They're protected. Instead of them losing it, they were able to make use of it. They're able to put it right into their funeral policy. Huge.
So the one thing that, and I don't know if it's a state of North Dakota rule, I did find out, and I am no expert on Medicaid because it is an animal all of its own.
Yeah.
But Medicaid is federal, and then every state determines how they're going to implement that differently. So that's why you need to check with your state and what's happening in the state of North Dakota. Life insurance, if you have life insurance, the cash value is not protected from that buy down. It does not matter. I had a client whose husband went into the nursing home. Medicaid made her take a full loan on her policy that she owned. Her husband had no ownership, no insurability in that policy. And she had to take a full loan, one time only. She didn't have to do it every year that he was in the nursing home, just the one time to get him in there. But they also wanted her to do the same thing on his policies, leaving her a widow with zero death benefit. Oh my gosh, I was livid. I actually called the attorney. I was so mad. I'm like, this is crazy. They left her with $130 of cash, and she's supposed to bury this guy with what? So she did go buy the nursing home stuff. They weren't happy about it because it was pre-2019.
Yep.
But she did buy that. So when you're saying that the irrevocable thing happened in North Dakota in 2019 and possibly other states, that means that they could not get the cash value of any life insurance they have with the nursing home.
Okay, yep. So that is the other side of what that change implemented. So if someone has life insurance, you're right, that cash value, when someone has to fill out an application for Medicaid, it asks you about life insurance. They're interested in the cash value.
No.
So now, because of that irrevocable change, someone can actually have their life insurance policies irrevocably assigned to the funeral home. That will keep it protected, because Medicaid is going to give that family a few options. Either they're going to have to get rid of the life insurance, surrender that cash in that policy, or they have to have it irrevocably assigned. So basically, it's like saying that the funeral home is a beneficiary of that life insurance policy. Now, don't let that scare you, because one of two things. One, it's just now, instead of, let's say she never did that. Let's say someone had life insurance and that person passed away. It's usually you go through like a probate. It's like a claims process.
Not
and
for
a lot
life
of times,
insurance.
For life insurance?
The death benefit automatically goes to the beneficiary.
The
There's
beneficiary.
no probate. Yep.
So
everything else goes through probate, but not life insurance. It will go. The problem with life insurance, Allison, is the death benefit is part of the estate. And so the estate, if their estate's too big, now we have a problem with the death benefit because of estate tax, but not, so maybe probate for that purpose.
Yes. And so, but there can be a delay. So a lot of times and I tell people, you know, with life insurance, if you have it, there's a lot of times where the family's going to have to pay for the funeral up front to get reimbursed from that insurance company, that death benefit. Mm-hmm. So when it's irrevocably assigned to the funeral home, the family doesn't have to go through any of that delay. We know the money's coming because it's assigned to the funeral home. So once we go through all of the costs of the funeral, all three parts of that funeral contract, of course, if that person is not on Medicaid, the extra funds then just go back to the family. Mm. If someone's on Medicaid is going to want that extra funds. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of You know what? Everyone's a little different. So, and I know you're in life insurance, so you're common with this, but I get a lot of people who even do a 1035 exchange for that reason.
Mhm.
They exchange that cash value of that life insurance to now buy a funeral policy with it.
Why
One, they
couldn't
want
they just why couldn't they just make you um, what did you just
the
call it?
beneficiary.
Or
So
the irrevocable, why wouldn't
irrevocable
they just do the
beneficiary.
irrevocable
Yep.
beneficiary instead of
A
doing
couple
a
of different
1035?
reasons. Well, because it depends on the size of the policy. And one, because we're a guaranteed funeral home. So now when they do a 1035, now they're locking in the cost of the funeral.
Yeah.
And
So
with
that's not the case with
no, because we can't put a guarantee on someone else's insurance company. You know what I mean? Like we can't guarantee because we have no idea what's going to happen with, you know what I mean? Like we can't put a guarantee on a different company.
Okay, so we are literally buying a death benefit. I mean, I knew we were buying death benefit, but we're buying the death benefit amount we need to cover the funeral, no more, no less.
Correct.
Okay, so I cannot say, oh, I have $1 million policy, but you only need 20,000, just take the whole policy.
Correct. So if someone if someone irrevocably assigns the policy to us as a beneficiary, sometimes they do that because it's larger. Like if it's a $50,000, let's say their cash value is 50,000. I can't do a 1035 exchange really on 50,000 for one person. I
Right.
can do it for two people. So if a husband's policy has 30,000 of cash value, I can do a 1035 exchange on that 30,000 that could fund both of their funeral policies. And now they're not taxed because they physically don't get that money in their pockets. It's transferred between one insurance company to another. Now they're locking in the cost of the funeral and it's irrevocable. So it's protected. So it all depends on what someone has. It doesn't work in everyone's favor for sure.
That's interesting because I would say, well, instead of doing, I mean, you could do a 1035, but what's the difference between doing a 1035 and just borrowing the amount of cash value we need to buy that with you guys?
And they can do that too. Some do that. Some just if it just depends on the policy. You know, like an example, I met with a woman that was 85 years old and her policy, she was still actually paying on her life insurance policy. Her cash value was very close to her death benefit. She had had it for years. This is a case where she has zero family. Okay. Well, I take it back. She has a niece like 3 states away. Her concern to me when she visited with me was what happens if I go into the nursing home and on Medicaid. So for her, it made more sense to do the 1035 exchange because her cash value and her death benefit were neck and neck. Okay, now she's not getting taxed, but now the money is guaranteeing her cost of her funeral. Okay, so her niece is not going to have to chip in. And it's irrevocable.
Because if she outlives her policy,
right, it's going to endow. Right.
It's going to endow, and then they're going to send her the cash, and she's going to have to pay tax on the growth. So people understand that if you have a mom, a grandma, somebody that is, 90, 95, 100, and they're outliving their policies, that policy endows, which means it ends. Cash value, death benefit will equal each other, and they will get a check, and they will have to pay they will have to pay taxes on any of the growth of that policy. And so, that would make sense to do a 1035 because then we're just taking the money and moving it into another policy, and there is not going to be any tax implications.
Right. But and then she was done paying on it.
So what happens in that policy, in that example? Okay, so I've 1035 this money over, but it was $100,000, but my funeral is not going to cost $100,000.
So that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't do a 1035 exchange for that.
Okay.
The only way that works.
I can't, I'm trying to think of, God, can we just get our money back then? Like the nursing home or the funeral home only needs 20,000 to bury me. They just send me a check for the other 80.
They will. They will. Okay. They will if you're not on Medicaid, of course, when someone passes. So I'm going to give you an example of a couple.
But if you're on Medicaid, then the nursing home has to give the rest of that money to Medicaid.
the Medicaid is going to come, we give the money to the family
Yeah.
in any case. So let's say someone has a pre-need policy and at death, they said, hey, my mom died and she was on Medicaid and there was money left over. We don't see it a lot, but we will see it. Let's say someone prepaid for a traditional funeral. Let's just say it was 14,000. But because of the way this person passed, it was switched to cremation, less.
Okay.
So now there's, let's just say $4,000 left over. If that family says my mom was on Medicaid when she passed, we give that 4,000 to the family, but Medicaid is going to come to the family to ask for that money back.
Oh, right, because you can only have so many assets. So even at death, Medicaid is checking to make sure there's not.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that irrevocable means that that policy, that funeral policy is protected while you're living. But when you pass, they want to recoup some of that money back because they've been paying for that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they want to take the excess back.
Here's another thing with here's another thing with pre-planning. One of my friends, I don't know how we were talking about this the other day, but she said, yeah, my husband got me a pre-planned funeral for Mariana for our anniversary.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't really know what to think of that. I said, well, I think it's quite awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic because she doesn't have any children. He has children. Yep. She does not have any children. She's like, they don't need this. Like, where am I going to do with all this money? Right. And so, but she said that he bought his probably 25, almost 30 years ago. And she said, and it's locked in. That's what he paid. And so we have to think about inflation, and we have a serious problem with inflation right now. And so if we can pre-plan and get that paid for, it's no different than my long-term care. People think I'm crazy because I have long-term care and I'm 48 years old. Well, I paid the bill the other day. It's $12,000. Like I told my daughter, she's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm paying my long-term care so you don't have to wipe my butt someday. Because I know, I don't want to burden my kids with having to take care of me. I'm already ornery. I cannot even imagine how ornery I'm going to be in the nursing home. And so, or at home or whatever. So it is definitely like the pre-planning piece of it. Now I locked that in. That's my cost for long-term care. It's the same thing with funeral homes. Caskets do not go down. The fuel to get the casket here does not go down. The equipment to do cremation does not go down. The equipment, like the fact that you guys have to build another building that's bigger to hold, that all gets passed down to the consumer. And so if you can do it now, do it now. And it's not ever, that's the thing that people think of with the trust as well. Oh, well, I can't make these decisions now. A trust can be changed as long as it's not irrevocable. You can change some of that stuff if you want to. So let's say that I did pre-plan. That brings me to a question. Let's say that I did pre-plan and I decided that I want to have a traditional burial. And then 10 years later, I decide that I want to be cremated. Do you guys then give the difference back? Do you keep
that initially? Because when you prepay, so in North, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So before, let's say before 1984, if someone wanted to prepay for their funeral, they would go into that funeral home. They would write the funeral home a check. That funeral home would deposit the money. But funeral homes started going out of business, or that individual moved away. Those funds were lost. You could not recover those funds. So in 84, it was changed that if you want to prepay for your funeral, it needs to be in something that's protected and transferable. So it's basically life insurance for funerals. And that way, if someone says to me, hey, I was planning on having everything here, my family's here, but now everyone has moved down to South Carolina and we're going to do everything there. We just sign off and we release it from us, and they just give it to another funeral home where they have moved to. So it's transferable. Same thing now, if you change your disposition. I can't change the policy because it's been over a certain amount of time. You can, just like, with life insurance, you have that grace period, right?
Yeah.
If they do it within that time frame, then yes. But if it's past that time frame, which is usually the case, then what we do is we just draw up a new cost estimate. And it grows a little bit. So they're going to gain a little bit. It's not meant for an investment. It's just meant to help offset some inflation. So we just redo basically changing it from traditional to cremation or vice versa. So the
Okay.
policy will stay that way. I can't change the dollar amount. But we let them know, hey, on that miscellaneous side, the death certificates, obituary, internment, inflation can happen on that end. Your costs are going to get locked in as far as service and merchandise with us, right?
Okay.
They paid that guarantee. The miscellaneous side, I said, basically what will happen then is once that time of passing, once we go through all of the costs of the funeral that we actually did do, the merchandise we did use, whatever then is left over can help offset some of the difference on that miscellaneous side. Interment, digging a grave today is like $900. It used to be like $50. So that will go up over time. So
And are we digging the grave in the winter in North Dakota
yes,
where
we
it
can.
is frozen and we have
Yep.
to thaw the ground, or are we doing
Yep.
it in the summer? I mean, those
Yep.
things all make a difference as well.
Correct.
So it's all just
So,
a life insurance policy on your
yep,
side to insure
correct.
everything, which is
Yep.
awesome.
Yep.
Is it?
Yeah.
And it's
yep.
not a term type policy. It's a
No.
whole life type policy because we're 1035ing it. And
Correct.
it's a single pay.
It's a
Right.
single pay or multi-pay. So just like life insurance, you're covered while making
Okay.
payments. So if someone says to me, I can't qualify for life insurance and I really want to be able to do this for my family, I don't want them left with these costs. Then depending on their health situation, some people are still able to do a multi-pay. Some can't. It just depends on what they have been diagnosed with. But let's just say that they're eligible to do a multi-pay. They can, it's just like regular life insurance. They're covered while making those payments. There is that 2-year, obviously, grace period or that contingent time frame.
Yeah.
But let's say they decide to do the 10-year payment plan and 3 years into it, they pass away. That full value of that face value of that policy is still going to get provided to pay for their funeral, and no one continues to make those payments.
Right.
So I get a lot of people don't even know that that's what funeral homes offer, right? Like that's how we fund funerals. And so I'll get people who call and just say, I just want to make sure I'm going to see if I qualify for life insurance. I would like to get my funeral taken care of. So I just want to make sure I take out enough. Can you tell me what the cost of a funeral is? So once I tell them that's what I'm going to be doing with you. And you don't have to qualify medically other than, again, if it's a hospice situation, you can only do a single pay. You cannot do payments if you're on hospice.
Okay.
It's more of like, if you're imminent or on hospice, it's like an annuity, basically. It's just a single premium. So yeah, there's options. People can do monthly, annual, semi-annual. Because there's no interest on life insurance, they can pay it off whenever they want to.
No, I know that you guys used life insurance, but I thought it was a specific kind. I didn't realize it was, I guess I don't know what I thought. I thought it was more term like. No. Because we're just paying for it until we pass. I didn't realize it had the cash value in it and it was transferable, and that's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. I have a very, very, it's a busy position for me. It's, when I meet with people and they say to me that they do have life insurance, then we're going to talk about that. Let's talk about what kind of life insurance. And it blows my mind that a lot of them have no clue even what kind they have.
Oh,
no clue. Do you still pay on it? I don't know. Is it term or whole life? No clue. So, when I
is it universal life?
Yes.
No, you can get me on my soapbox. Yep. Is it universal life or variable life or indexed, which is all going to collapse, or is it actually a good whole life policy?
Right. I met with someone.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I know. So I did meet with someone the other day. She had no clue. And when I looked at it, I was shocked that she had no cash value to it after having it that long. But because it was the
universal
graded, it was like a graded. So even everything just started going down.
So those are universal life policies, Allison.
Yep.
So if you look, like I talk about this all the time, right?
Yeah.
If you look, and I know you're in the insurance world, obviously, so you get that, but the universal, variable, and indexed is all tied to the market in one way, shape, or form. And so it's basically it's renewable term with a lot of expenses. And so when those people have that and they come into you, Well, I don't even know if, I mean, I talk about it all the time with my clients. I don't know that you're going to have this when you die because the cash
100%.
value is eating, the policy's eating up your cash value.
She had none, and she's had it forever. And unfortunately, a daughter-in-law was with. She didn't quite comprehend it. So she convinced the mom just to keep that and not do a funeral policy. And I was like, wow, I said, if I were you, I would, and you're paying $100 and some a month on that. And it's like, I said to her, you know what?
So what, did it have a guaranteed death benefit? So if the cash value was nothing, did it have a guaranteed death benefit?
Of 7,000 only. Correct. And she's paying 100.
But if she 1035 that for you?
Well, 1035 exchange is only on cash value.
Oh, right. She
do a 1030, but she didn't have any cash value. So to me, if I were her,
cancel the policy.
Cancel the policy and buy a funeral policy with it. 100%.
Well, what's going to happen is she's going to get a letter. If there was only $7,000 of cash value, she's going to get a letter next year.
There's no cash value.
Or 7,000 of death benefit, sorry.
Yep.
She's going to get a letter that says if you want to keep this going, you're going to end up paying $20,000 a year or whatever it is.
They did tell her that. It's already gone up. And she said it's going to go up again, but her daughter was like, I don't think we should do anything unless you go into a nursing home. And I was like, wow, I would definitely be. So it's just.
You should have said, I have this friend. And if you want this explained in English, Mary Jo.
Oh,
like
I was there trying very, very, very hard. And it just wasn't clicking that way. And I felt like it was more or less maybe me I think she almost thought of it like I was just trying to sell her something.
It's very easy, Allison, when all you have to do is say, where's your annual statement?
And that's what she pulled out for me because I was at their home. So I got
to see where are the fees? Look at, these are all the fees and the charges.
She's had that policy since the 60s.
That's not universal life then. That policy was a whole life.
It's reduced. I swear it said universal on there.
Universal didn't start till 74.
Well, so she said it changed though. She said she had it and then something changed and now.
So what they probably had whole life and they 1035'd it into a universal life because there's going to be a better rate of return.
Right.
Oh God.
Yeah, no, there's nothing to that policy. I just was
stories.
Like, oh.
See, now I am so glad Allison said that because all of you guys listening, hear me scream and yell about universal variable and indexed all the time. And now somebody that we didn't even talk about this ahead of time. She is seeing the exact same thing. So make sure mom and dad don't have universal variable indexed and that it was not moved over and 1035 from a whole life into a universal life or something. And 1035 just means, we've been talking a lot about that. 1035 just means we're going to take cash value from one policy and move it over to another policy and use that money to either pay premium or just move it over to cash value and pay premium out of pocket. But the cash value gets moved without any tax implication. That's all a 1035 does. And there are not a lot of reasons to do, like, I am not a huge proponent of 1035s. What Allison is doing with them is completely different. But a lot of times, if you have somebody doing a 1035 exchange, you better really be looking at why. Even I won't do them on a universal variable or indexed unless that in-force illustration clearly shows mom and dad are going to outlive that policy and we have to save it. If we have to save it, we're going to save it. Otherwise, yes, maybe we'll 1035 that. And so that is so disheartening because now we have to find money to pay for the funeral because the death benefit was supposed to be there and it's not there.
Right. Yep. And it's definitely gone down because she said, well, it used to have cash value and then and she didn't even understand it. She was like, I don't even know what we did. The agent just said that this is what I should do. And we just did it. And now it's gone way down, but now I pay more. And I said, oh, so she pulled it out and I did look at it, which I try really hard to do. Like, especially when I go to their home, it's much easier because they'll have it usually somewhere, you know, and I just, you know, and like you said earlier, you know what, here's kind of how I viewpoint some things with with life insurance. And if someone, it depends on what they have. I agree with you. I think sometimes people should just, even if they're older, just go with a term. So then at least if something happens within that term, I know that there's no cash value, but then again, there's not cash value for someone to also take.
Mm-hmm.
But at least that if you do die within that term, your family's gonna have something. And then plus the cost is much cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So it just depends on.
If it's a cost thing, yes. Like a lot of what I do, Allison, is convertible term. And so
Sure.
we're going to buy term and then we can convert it to whole life. And
Correct.
so
Correct.
if we need it for that death benefit, great, fantastic. But I think too, I tell people all the time, make sure that that policy is either owned in a trust at some point, or
Right.
knowing that Medicaid is going to take it. Now, you
Mhm.
either buy it down or you just pay for your funeral, or you just pay for your nursing home with the cash value. What is the difference? I mean,
Right.
my long-term care policy is a whole life chassis. It is whole life insurance. If I don't use it, cash value, I can cancel it and get cash value, or there's death benefit for the kids and
Right.
or my heirs. And so it definitely, that piece of it, it's locked in. The price isn't going to go up. Yeah, it's the Cadillac version of long-term care. It's a little bit more expensive, but chances are I may end up in the nursing home, but I know I'm going to die. And so I'm going to buy the Cadillac version of it. And that's $12,000 for 20 years and I'm done. At 65, I'm done paying that. And I have $8,000 a month plus a 3% inflation rider. And so I've locked long-term care in. Why aren't we locking in the cost of our funerals? Like, that just makes so much sense to me.
Okay, so your friend who said her husband bought her a funeral policy for their anniversary. So I had a gal that she listens to Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey talked a lot about taking care of your funeral. She goaled herself to pay for her funeral on her 40th birthday. So now, same situation, she has no children. So, realistically, her parents are probably going to pass before her. But now, because we're a guaranteed funeral home, right? Not all of them are. You got to ask. She locked in the cost of her funeral. Okay, it's protected. It's irrevocable. What a great way to turn 40. Let's say she lives to be a nice long 85 years old. Holy cow. I mean, knowing that if she's never going to have children. So, who would be the one, like she said, who is going to be the one she has a sister. Would my sister have to pay for it? Yeah.
That's exactly right. I have friends that have had to pay for their parents' funeral because there was no death benefit. There was no pre-planning. And, it is really, here's my take on it. You've lived a full life. It is your responsibility. You've worked. It is your responsibility to take care of that. Why leave that responsibility to somebody else? I mean, not everybody wants to talk about it. My husband does not like having these conversations. I think they are fascinating. Today, I said, oh my God, I get to talk about pre-planned funerals today. I am so excited. And everybody thinks I have lost my ever-loving mind. I'm like, no, this is so exciting to be able to understand what goes into it and to just have that conversation. You're going to graduate. You just don't know when graduation happens.
Correct.
And so
I'm going to give you another case scenario that everyone should be aware of this, because a lot of people have the misconception, and it happens a lot. Okay. So I'm going to bring this up before our conversation ends, but I got a phone call from a girl that was in her mid-20s, and her and her sister are POA for their grandmother. Okay. So the grandmother has one child, but they're estranged. They haven't had anything to do with each other. So these girls are taking care of grandma. So when she called, she just said, look, my grandma's in a nursing home. We're POA. She is on Medicaid, and we just were thinking about, boy, she should really get some stuff figured out for her funeral planning. What programs is she eligible for because she receives Medicaid? How much will Medicaid pay for her funeral? What do you think the answer is?
Zero.
Zero. And most people think because my family was receiving Medicaid, they get county benefits.
What?
The only way someone would get county benefits, those girls would also have to qualify. They have to prove that they financially cannot afford to pay for their grandmother's funeral. There is county benefits. You have to apply for them. So if someone says, well, my mom's on Medicaid, I know that Medicaid pays for part of, no, there's county benefits. You have to apply for it. And that's going to be a cremation, and it's only up to a certain dollar amount. But the surviving next of kin have to also qualify, basically. You would have to prove that you financially cannot afford to pay for it. So these two girls, she said, we're fresh out of college. We actually just started our family. So we're the ones who are going to have to pay for. Yeah. Yeah.
So what happens if they don't have anybody?
So,
what happens if I am homeless and I have nobody?
So I'll tell you how it works with us. Okay. So my husband has been a funeral director at the funeral home I work at for 32 years. Okay. He's 51 and he's been there 32 years. He has seen and done it all the changes, everything over time. Right. So he will then help if they can't locate anybody, they're going to get county assistance. So you're going to be looking at a cremation. Okay. In some cases, we are able to locate, but they refuse to have any part of it. So, or let's say that they do fill out paperwork for assistance and it comes back denied for some reason. My husband may work with the family a little bit better on what can we do. Mm-hmm. For someone like my husband, who lives, eats, and breathes this industry, he's not in the funeral industry just to take people's money. To deny a family a funeral for their loved one is like saying that person's life wasn't valuable because there's no money. He will tell them, I can't do, I can't do a full casket. I can't do those things, but I can work with you on other things. Mm-hmm. It is more common now than we've ever seen for people to pass away at a hospital that have no one. They're homeless. They're in the morgue for a while because they can't locate. Then they actually will call us because they know our funeral home will do our darndest to see what we can do. We're going to see what we can find for family, try get some of that county assistance to kick in, because it does happen. So are there some that end up getting some county assistance? For sure. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think, I often wondered, what do we do? Because there's nothing there. So it's good to know that you guys get some assistance. But at the end of the day, if you're not, that's interesting. If you're not qualifying, someone's paying for mom and dad's, aunts and uncles, someone's paying for the funeral. And here's the funny thing to me, and maybe we'll end on this because we've gotten really long, but we have demanded and tax penalized people for not having health insurance, but we do not mandate life insurance of any kind. Mm-hmm. And even if they all bought life insurance just for me, at least they would have something for you at the end. So it's crazy that we expect the hospitals to get paid, but we don't expect funeral homes to get paid. Mm-hmm. Think about that. We don't know that we're going to get sick. Obviously, if we live to be 95, we're going to get sick, right? But we don't know that if we're going to die in a car accident or if we're going to die from cancer, but we do know that we're going to die. And so not planning for that, to me, is, I understand it's expensive. I get that. But putting that on somebody else, the fact that the government thinks that they need to step in and tell us what to do with our healthcare, but then if we can't afford to pay for it and the county is paying for somebody's cost, I'm paying for that funeral. I am paying your husband to take care of somebody that did not take care of themselves. Right. How much can we handle of that? And do we pass it on to families? And I'm kind of mumbling, but it kind of makes me mad, obviously, because you're going to graduate. Yeah. People ask me all the time, is it really common for people to pre-plan and pre-fund their funerals? I said, very much, very much.
Very much. I mean, I am busy all the time. I have appointments all day, every day.
And it's
I
just going
mean
to
it
get busier because of the boomers. And
for
so
sure.
it is nice to know that they are doing that. But
Yep.
I also feel like people our age need to be doing that because,
Yes.
I mean, I don't.
So my average age, you know, they say the average age of someone that pre-plans is in their 70s. I think for me, it's a little bit under that. It just depends. At the end of the year, it's going to be older because a lot of time it's a suspend down situation. But I get a ton of people who are in their 50s and 60s. And a lot of it is prompted by the fact that they lost someone, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, and it shocked them so much
Yeah.
that they thought, you know what, we need to take care of this.
Yeah.
We need to take care of it. I mean, it's extremely important. You know, if any of you guys that are listening into this today live in an area, check out your funeral home, check on pre-planning, see what's available to you, check on that irrevocable. Do they offer that guarantee? Those are all things I would think of. But you can do when someone does it correctly, when I meet with people and we do it correctly, we tackle all of those details. I always tell them, do you have any idea what kind of gift you are just left your family? The biggest peace of mind, okay? Because when your family comes here, when that day comes and they're sitting at this big table, we're going to pull out your file and 90% of everything will be done, including the cost of your funeral. They're basically going to be left to where to order those ham sandwiches from and the day and the time to hold that funeral.
And you're going to get your songs. I am still
Yes.
a little bit bitter. When my grandma passed, I stayed with her when she was at home, and she's like, Mary Jo, these are the songs I want. She had them in her Bible. And my aunt came home, and my aunt hates the song Amazing Grace. And so we had it at service. We had it at visitation, but we did not have it at the funeral. And I'm still mad because her and I sang Amazing Grace all the time together. I am the worst singer on the planet, and we sucked, but we had a good old time singing it.
Yeah.
And it was not her wish. And I'm like, no, this is what she wanted,
yeah.
you know? So
yeah. So people ask me that.
What I want.
Right. People do ask me that. Can my family change my pre-planning? They can.
Yeah.
Do they? If you took the time, if they're just so happy that you've done it, if you've taken the time to pick out your songs and your readings and all of these details, they are going to honor that.
Yeah.
It's very rare that something gets changed. Again, disposition can be changed because we don't know how we're going to pass away.
Right.
So if visitation or full body viewing and all that isn't even doable, then yeah, they can change that to cremation. But as far as details go, we don't see things like that changed. They chose that. That's their wishes.
Okay.
You know, so.
All right, Allison, we got to go. I thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. I hope all of you have, what funeral home, if you are local to Bismarck and listening, Allison works at?
I am with Eastgate and Parkway Funeral and Cremation Service.
Okay, awesome. So you can call there, get a hold of Allison if you are in the Bismarck Mandan area. Otherwise, check with your local funeral homes, see about planning. But as usual, if you need anything, comments, concerns, whatever, Mary Jo at withoutthebank.com. Happy to answer those. If you've not gotten my books yet, do so. Go to the websites. You know what they are. All right, guys, have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next podcast.